Welcome to another VRANT. It's about 30 days left in summer for those of you in the northern hemisphere in somewhat warmer climate zones. There's a lot going on, not just in the garden with my flowers and pepper plants, but all around the world there's some craziness going on. And it's an example of how out of control things really are right now as far as people are concerned with their dependence on media, social media, for how they think. We've always been, reliant on the news to find out what's going on around us outside of our immediate sphere of influence. But we've never been, as a society, so caught up in what is going on around us. And that's what social media really has done. It's created this obsession, this whole new breed of news junkies. But they're not really news junkies. They're headline readers and meme sharers and commenters on things that they have little knowledge of. And it's and it's gotten to the point where it's out of control because there are those who are have high amount of followers. They call them influencers, for example, on like Instagram, that for no other reason than timing and buying a lot of followers in the days when you could buy followers and grow your channels to outrageous proportions, and now suddenly people just, something appears on these sites and forget about the idea of people buying it, buying a product endorsement. It's the same concept of they're buying into some sort of ideology or belief system almost. And it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy because there is no connection by the average person to the vast majority of these stories and these things. But because people react and retweet and share and post and and comment, that creates this like self-fulfilling prophecy that moves markets. For example, the stock market at this particular time. When I'm recording this right now on August 15th, and yesterday the U.S. Dow Jones, the industrial average, was down like 800 points, which isn't as bad as going down 800 points 10 years ago or more. People also have it was, it's a percentage game. So sometimes people are confused by numbers. Oh, the Dow's down 100 points today. It must be bad. Well, if the Dow was only 5,000, the way it was, say, 25 years ago or so, yeah, 100 points, well, even 100 points then wouldn't be all that bad. But it would still be substantial. But when it's 25,000, you could lose 1,000 points, which would be the equivalent of it going down 100 points when it was at 2,500, say. But people don't think about that. People just get caught up in sensationalism. They also don't understand the influence of algorithms and electronic trading today, and how it's so much different than it was decades ago as far as trading was concerned, when it was more of, you had certain brokerage houses, and it was almost a manual operation. I mean, computers have always been involved pretty much, but you didn't have these millisecond transfers and all of these algorithms that are constantly sifting through data uh, pertaining to the market and everything, and are programmed to do buy, sell, or trade, do some kind of thing when specific milestones are hit or whatever, without the human, someone saying, "Hey, wait a second, the economy's not that bad. We got the best unemployment, in the history of the country right now, and yeah, there's China's not doing too well, but that really doesn't affect us all that much as people think it does." So, we have this, it's crazy times. But it's like that the same with politics, which I'm not going to get into. But, just dealing with it from the phenomenon. People respond to certain things, and they're triggered, as they say, because of media and entertainment people, or a select group of political figures that get media and entertainment attention. And so they suddenly believe whatever they see because, it's on TV, or it's the storyline in a television series or in a movie, or there's a pretty news anchor, or, delivering this story. The cult of personality steps in. And that's what happens when you have media and entertainment merged with politics and finance. It just becomes this. It becomes, as I spoke before, it becomes the pop culture, instead of pop culture being something like, art, music, that sort of thing. In fact, so the pop culture is hardly culture at all. I wouldn't call politics culture, really. I wouldn't call Wall Street finances culture. You know, it's business. So it's very fascinating. And it took me a while to say this, but there's nothing wrong with your monitor. We're kind of in comic book mode here. As you can see, my garden's in full bloom. You've seen most of this stuff. Still got a bunch of kale, bunch of parsley. I got a lot of those little yellow tomatoes popping up. And everything's, just growing like crazy. Doing fine. Been eating from my garden as the bulk of my meals since May, really. I planted early this year. Since late May. It started out with salads when I had my crazy lettuce crop. I planted some more lettuce and some radishes about 2 weeks ago. They've already broken the soil, so I expect to have lettuce again the end of September and early October. Right up to the freeze, and of course the freeze don't even hurt things like kale and parsley and a lot of those cooler weather crops. They're fine. And they'll last through the winter too. But yeah, yesterday I don't normally pay attention to, the stock market, because I don't invest in stocks. And I don't really, quite frankly, care so much about the economy anymore since I've been living independent. I have a fixed rate on my mortgage. It's a low rate. When interest rates were really low, that's when I bought my house. I bought it for cheap, less than $20,000 about 5 years ago. Only have a 15-year mortgage, so I only have like 10 years on this thing. So I don't really care about fluctuations in the financial market. I have no vested interest in it. If the whole system collapsed tomorrow, I guess my biggest worry would be people climbing over that fence and stealing my food. But yeah, I have the ability to grow food, collect rainwater. I have everything I need. I dabble in solar, and I will be expanding my solar system over the next year as well. So, and this other thing I was just telling someone the other day, the average person, I used a couple of years ago, I started making, I never really baked bread or made pizzas, or anything like that myself much. I mean, I've done it over the years, but I've used an oven and, more traditional type of thing. Used a cast iron pan or frying pan to fry something or whatever. But I started to use this cast iron pan I have, and I found that I can make like uh, I guess you would call it a pan pizza. And dough, it's real easy to make. I mean, dough is just basically water and flour. In fact, I don't even really use. I've gotten this self-rising flour, and sorry for that slight break. I had to clear my throat. Um, so I use either self-rising flour, or if I'm making a pizza, I don't even worry so much about that. And I'll put a little bit of seasoning and some olive oil in with the flour as I make it. Maybe a little bit of honey, and I'll mix that dough ball up, and get the cast iron pan, put it on the stovetop, get it hot, and then put a little oil or something down so it's not going to stick. And then I just spread out that ball of dough and fill that pan with it, and then flip it over real quick. But as I'm flipping it over, I put a little bit of cornmeal down, because that's one of the secrets that a lot of pizzerias do that make that crust nice. So I flip it over. So in other words, I put it down, let part of the let part of the dough get like kind of seared, or just slightly hardened a bit, but not for long, not really long at all. And then flip it over. And then press it down and make it into the mold of what would be pizza in the pan. And then just add the sauce, ingredients, and whatever else I want, and cheese and whatever. And then cover it, and you've got a pan pizza, and depending on how long you keep it on, some people will take it, won't cover it, they'll just take it and then put it in an oven. But the thing is, what the whole purpose of this babble is, that if you have a grill outside, uh, you can cook anything you want to on a grill. Most people think, oh, here's the grill top, so it's like I'm going to make burgers or steaks or hot dogs or whatever they cook, on this grill top. Maybe some people put aluminum foil down, which isn't recommended. That stuff's horrible for you. Aluminum's not good for the human body. But you never think of just putting a cast iron skillet on top of the grill. You don't even have to worry about how clean the grill plate is. And you also don't have to have charcoal or gas. You could just have wood burning, because you're not connected to it. So I have like a fire pit and a grill in my backyard. I guess what I'm saying is, if the power ever went out, I've got things, I could listen to music, I've got water, food to drink, I could cook things. And quite frankly, I do this stuff so often and I spend so much time out in this yard that it wouldn't really be that big a difference. I mean, my primary things that I do are, listen to music, have something to eat, that kind of thing. Now, of course, I'm a YouTuber in the sense that I watch way more YouTube than I make, though I do have a substantial amount of music tracks on YouTube, which you should listen to. I like them. I think they're good. But, the idea is that it's not so much survivalism or homestead idea. It's the idea of just living more in touch with life, reality, nature, the way it really is. But at the same time, not necessarily sacrificing or being apart from society and civilization. I don't live out in the woods. I live basically in a neighborhood. More, it's not the traditional neighborhood. It's an older neighborhood, so it's more, it's not that cookie cutter thing. The buildings actually have architecture to them, and of course it's an old neighborhood, so there's many empty buildings, and they're tearing down some buildings and all that stuff. That's why my property was cheap. But like I've said before, I still walk. I can walk to a grocery store, walk to a doctor's office, walk to a convenience store or a pizza shop or something like that. Mass transportation. There's a bus stop across the street from me, actually. So I'm in the heart of everything, but at the same time, it's like I'm separate yet attached to society, and I like that. So back to this people acting like lemmings and following the Pied Piper to their own demise, really. What's going on in the world right now is an attempt at globalism. And what the term globalism, it's a broad term, and to some people it might mean different things, but in what I'm trying to talk about and what most people consider globalism. Globalism is the idea kind of like the UN. And it's a very idealistic, dreamy thing that there would be, one world and we would live in peace and harmony with each other. There would be no borders whatsoever, no wars, nobody would be starving, no struggling, all that sort of thing. The utopia idea. And I don't think there's anyone out there, any rational person out there that doesn't say, yeah, it would be great if there was world peace and, it was utopia, back to the Garden of Eden. But the reality is, and everyone knows this, even those that pretend that, and push this globalist idea, they know this, that with over 7 billion people in the world, that, the kumbaya, peace and harmony and love thing is just not realistic. I mean, there are so many flashpoints all over the world, so many people, at each other's throats that are ignored when the globalists push this agenda of saying, we've got to redistribute the wealth and turn the United States into a socialist country or something like that. I mean, look at the problems. Like, even in countries like, how long has India and Pakistan have had their problems? And you've got areas like South Africa where you have, in fact, it's been off the radar recently, but all what was going on in South Africa. And then, of course, you've got the South China Sea, Hong Kong, what's going on in Hong Kong itself right now, but a lot of stuff in Southeast Asia. And as much as, people like to say, oh, U.S. meddling, has caused, those are uh, several examples that the U.S. really has nothing to do with anything. In fact, actually, the U.K. is more, the root cause of South Africa and, well, conceivably the Hong Kong problem with how that whole thing was given back to China after 100 years. But be that as it may, you could still look at things that are going on in Argentina, Venezuela, and of course the Middle East is just constantly uh, going crazy. North Africa, and all the turmoil in Europe and everywhere else. And then you just then look at crime statistics. Recently in the US we've had our share of these crazy acts by extreme, whack jobs. But all over the world, there's just unbelievable acts of violence being committed. And what's never taken into account when people talk about globalism and everything, just, no borders, no countries, no socialism, all this stuff, they never really take into consideration the reality of the way it really is on the street and the way people really live. And instead of trying to solve the problems on, on a grassroots level, you could look like even in the US, for example, there's no one really trying to solve the homeless problems in our major cities. You have all these Congress people that are, from all these various districts, and they just ignore it. Instead, they're constant investigations about political things. So when forget about where your stance is on any of that stuff. That's not the issue here. What I'm trying to get at is that those who talk the most about globalism and this socialist utopia world that they want to usher in can't even seem to manage their own congressional districts, their own neighborhoods where homelessness and crime is literally out of control. I mean, anyone who pays even just loose attention to the news knows that the crime rate in Chicago is just beyond belief. But every major city is like that. I mean, people are literally being shot, stabbed, raped, beaten up every day. And then they say, well, we'll just, we'll get rid of all the guns. They did that in Britain, did that, and stabbings, murder by knife and stabbings are like at an all-time high. The crime, the thing is, people, what's not being identified in society is that people are basically unhappy. That's like goes without saying. There's a lot of very unhappy people out there, discontent. And this has been going on for so long that has turned into a psychosis, and it has driven many people, many people to violence. It's just driven them mad. And that's the things that people need to address. You can't solve problems with laws. It's looking at the root causes of how our society is just so messed up. And it all boils down to this way that politics and finance has become the pop culture, that social media has taken over society. A thing that wasn't even around a little over a decade ago. People weren't, very few people had anything like a smartphone, except people in business or if you were very, you were well off. The average person did not even have a smartphone a little over a decade ago. Facebook didn't exist. People didn't have Facebook accounts a little over a decade ago. So we're talking about, you know, not even a generation. And this has become the center of everyone's life. And people are dealing with this daily, obsessed with it. Like I say, news junkies, but they're really just social media junkies. And, there have been countless people have come out and about the dopamine, buzz that people get from seeing a like or, that kind of thing. Getting friends added to their, pages. That's a text, being texted back, this sort of thing. But all these things are esoteric. They're simply not real. They have nothing to do with anything living, breathing in society. And that's why society spirals out of control. And that's why we can't solve real problems, because it's all just about memes and people passing around, talking points that somebody started somewhere who was an influencer or who managed to have access to some sort of media company or entertainment company, and this idea just gets pushed around and suddenly everyone's talking about it and believing it and crying on it, like global warming and CO2. The science on global warming and CO2 has been like out there for over a decade, basically saying that the whole concept of man-made global warming and CO2 is not the problems that we're having with climate and weather patterns in the United States. But people are still dealing with that. I mean, I know I had a book. I mean, I was all in on that myself. I believed it. I watched Al Gore's movie, the first one. With compelling stuff where he shows this data and gets up on a ladder and all that stuff and says, look, it's off the charts. But, then I studied and found out that, no, basically it has to do with solar cycles and the sun and the magnetic field. And and it's actually common sense when you think about it. I mean, when the sun's out in the daytime, it's warm. When the sun's not out at night, it's cooler. When the Earth's tilted towards the sun, in a particular hemisphere, that's a summer. When it's a non-cloudy day and the sun's really out bright, it gets to be in the 80s or 90s. So it's not like it, but the other part they don't talk about is the magnetic field and how the sun has a magnetic field, and during a solar minimum, magnetic field that it protects us from cosmic rays. They're not just the solar rays, but other rays coming from various other sources in the galaxy. And how these magnetic fields affect, heat up the planet, and how they also affect the jet streams, which has become like a roller coaster. And that's why we've seen, particularly in, recent times, these ridiculous fluctuations where it's really cold and then it's really hot. It's because instead of the jet stream being, being one at the upper part of the planet and one at the lower part of the planet, these things are like have these big dips in them. So yeah, we got weather problems because we're entering a grand solar minimum, but there's more of a cooling problem than there is going to be a heating problem. But that's almost like completely absent from anything on mainstream media, as they call it. And I now realize there's probably somebody listening to this now, if anybody listens to it at all, that would be like, oh my God, he's a climate denier. It's like, how could you be a climate denier? Climate is climate. The earth is the earth. But you have to open your mind to the idea that the sun is this big ball. It's a star, and it gives us heat and affects our magnetic fields. It also, and geothermal, and it affects our volcanism and even earthquakes. It's been proven lately. But that's the kind of thing, is what I'm saying. Where uh, something can get out there into the public arena through the media or entertainment, and suddenly it is adopted. It becomes a meme, and then there are people that just, it gets so, you know, pushed and so spread out that there's no way for anyone to understand that the thing may or may not be true. And that's a very scary place to be when when you just do not know what the truth is. It's like I always say, everything you know is wrong. And quite literally, sometimes that's absolutely 100% true. But, think about that. You don't know. The only thing you really know is what you hear, unless you actually witnessed it or it happened to you. So everything you get is second, third, or fourth hand. And there's just this assumption that, oh, the pretty announcer on TV said it. Well, she wouldn't lie. Well, it's ridiculous. You know, they're not necessarily lying. They're just ill-informed, or they got it secondhand, and they're it's just being passed on from one person to millions. It's very could be disheartening at times if you get caught up in that whole thing. But back to the garden, I have found peace among this greenery, the birds, the pond, the mini fountain, the fresh fruits and veggies. And, that's really all that matters. That's what you are. You're a living being. These are living things. This is what we do. This is life on this planet. And it's a fragile existence. We're hurling through space at unbelievable speeds in areas where there's all sorts of other objects. It's like when someone is playing pool and they break and the balls go all over. That's kind of like that's how crazy our existence is. It's just on deeper time scales. But we don't know from one day to another. During this sentence, we can be hit by an asteroid. End of story. A solar flare can take out the grid next week or 50 years from now, whatever. Some people believe it's going to happen in the year 2046, but that's another story. But, this idea of watching a stock market, tumble, watching people get completely bent out of shape to where they commit acts of violence based upon ideas that are spread on social media. And again, by all sorts of people with all sorts of opinions. The idea here is that, the mere act of picking sides and dealing with politics like as if it's a sports team and rah, rah, rah for your team, we're going to win, is exactly the problem that there is. This whole idea of us versus them. Because that's simply not how it works. It's not us versus them. I mean, we're all here on this planet together. and we all have the, the opportunity, same opportunities as the next person. And I know that's a touchy point with some people. They think, oh, well, yeah, if you were born in a part of the world in abject poverty, you obviously have less opportunity than you do if you were born in a Western country. But the fact of the matter is, I'm talking to people in the Western country, because those people in abject poverty, they don't even have a cell phone. They don't have running water, indoor toilets, which quite frankly, I put the indoor toilet way above the cell phone as far as, great creations uh, by human beings. Think about that. Would you rather use an outhouse or have Facebook? Well, I know what I would. So yeah, that's a quick aside. That's why some of these homesteaders, or these people that are like off gridders, I should say, not homesteaders, that they have these, into the composting thing, composting toilets and stuff. It's like, come on, it's the 21st century. Dig yourself a septic tank or something. I mean, for crying out loud. Uh, that makes no sense. So embrace technology, embrace telecommunications. It's great. But to believe everything that is out there and to get caught up and emotionally involved in it is really not healthy. It's not healthy for your spirit. It's not healthy for your body. And it's not healthy for, the people around you. Because it just gets worse and worse and more intense and intense. See, people don't seem to have the ability to let go, to just diffuse the situation. And we're all that, it's natural for us as, human beings to get angry, to be upset, to be driven to our wits' end sometimes by things. But as humans, we also have that ability to just let go, take a deep breath and say, they can't eat us. It's not like we're in the middle of the jungle and we're worrying about a predator like a lion, or we're in the woods and we're worried about a bear that just wants to literally eat us alive. So these things that people talk about and worry about and get crazy about, they never really take it down to that level and see how good their life is. It's the same as people, I grew up in a family where my father worked. In fact, at one point he worked two jobs. And my mother worked later on. So the idea is that, a lot of people, they'll point at someone and they'll say, people have privilege or something like that. It's like, no, not really. Some of the most successful people in this country and in other parts are people that just manage to turn hardship into success. And while that, while the genuinely people who struggle and can't break out of bad situations, the idea is you can't just make a blanket statement that, oh, we have to, share the wealth and redistribute the wealth. Because the fact is, I don't know, I could remember being so broke. I'm not even going to get into it, but I mean, I was broke for very long periods of time. Could travel a lot, and you do well. And now I'm pretty much semi-retired. I mean, I just do pick and choose what I want to do. I don't, because I don't want to, I don't want the rat race anymore. I decided against that. Just my own personal thing. And I was always in executive positions throughout my career. and I'm sure I could, assume another executive position and get paid very well to do that. But my thought is, well, what do you do with the money? What do I need it for? And it doesn't give you happiness. What are you going to do? Travel, I've pretty much traveled all over the place. Things, what things? What more, how many things do you really need? It's the question of being content, happy, and relaxed in life, accepting things. So, just to go back again to the stock market thing, since this is the topic of the last week. The U.S. economy is in pretty good shape um, considering that there are, the political class, particularly in Congress, refuse to deal with the problem of homelessness and crime in many of the cities. But outside of that, there apparently are close to 160 million people working right now in this country. That's more than ever before in the history of the country. So, from that standpoint, we have a healthy economy. Now, that's not the same in Europe and in Asia. These are, you look at a place like China, they have 1 billion more people than we do. 1 billion more. We only have about 320, I don't know, maybe as high as 350 million people. China has like 1.3 billion people. So they've got like 1 billion more than us. That's a lot of people to feed and house and, deal with. It's a lot more people that, potentially can cause pollution and problems. So those countries, they have problems. Europe has a serious problem. It tried to, it has a serious problem, with just all of the migrants that have just flooded into Europe, that have just, transforming the country and putting a strain on their economies because these new wave of migrants are uneducated without skills. And that's something people don't think about. The immigrants who came to the US, for example, over 100 to 150 years ago, when they came, they were skilled people. They had skills and they were artisans and craftsmen. And they literally built this country. This country was built by skilled immigrants who came in, as they say, legally and all that. There were no, back then there wasn't even a welfare system. There wasn't Social Security. None of that stuff happened until Roosevelt came into office. People forget that. That was after the great, migrations, after, the last big migrations when, the Irish, Italians, all, came over in waves around the turn of the last century, 1900, late 1800s into 1900s. And those people, they worked hard. They worked in mines and factories, subhuman conditions, but they worked and they built up. And, you talk to anybody who's a descendant of that wave of immigrants, and they've all done, they've done fairly well, very well in many cases. But they look back at their grandparents and great grandparents, and they see what they built with their own hands and hard labor to actually get it. And that's one of the things that goes on today where people don't understand that. And so Europe is feeling, the U.S. doesn't really have as bad an illegal immigration problem as people think. Because first of all, our numbers are down, and that, believe me, that thing is blown out of proportion. There are certain people that wish they could water down our society to usher in more of a socialism. But the reality is it's not going to happen because the American way is the American way. People like things in the US. It is a consumerism society. People don't want to give up stuff. The average American doesn't want free money. I mean, they would gladly take it, but I mean, they want more than you can get from like what they call like some guaranteed wage or something, where they give everybody $1,000 or something like that. Because that won't allow them to have a car and pay for their car insurance and buy a house or have this, to get that HD TV, have a good internet service. See, that's always left out of the discussion. It's like even with healthcare, when they talk about healthcare. It's like if you're poor in this country, you get free healthcare and free prescriptions. I mean, that's a fact. I know because I've gone through times where I was, lost a job and whatever, and I found that safety net was actually there. And so that you got the food card, you got the free healthcare. And then you went back to work, you got whatever. You know, you get 26 weeks of unemployment, you lose your job. That's a reality. People who have very good jobs have free health care too. They leave that one out. The only people who have it the hardest are the lower scale workers because Congress again won't deal with fixing the and challenging the prescription drugs and the healthcare industry because the rates are simply too high. And so what happens is small businesses that are the number one employer in the United States, they can't afford the healthcare coverage. A couple of decades ago, it wasn't an issue because they could afford it. You would get healthcare. The other thing is, if anything ever happens to anybody and you don't have the money, you can always go to the emergency room and they have to treat you. But be that as it may, the idea is that there's tragedy out there. There's crime. There are crazy people. There's injustice. All of those things. But you cannot legislate against problems. We already have all the laws on the books that need to be there. It's illegal to commit every crime that's being committed. You see, and those who are religious, it's against their religion to commit these crimes. But we still see all these crimes being committed, all this violence, all these wars, and all this injustice. So when I see politicians saying, if I'm elected, I'll do this, and I say, you've been saying that. Politicians have been saying that forever. But every year, these problems, there seems to be more homeless people on the streets of San Francisco and Los Angeles, than there were decades ago. So, and you had both Republicans and Democrats in office over those past several decades. So the thing is making promises and it doesn't work. There's my last remaining zucchini plant. It's hard to make out because of this comic book effect. But I've had 3 zucchini plants die on me this year. Usually I have so many zucchini, I'm giving them away. This year I'm hoping I might get 2 or 3 out of that one before it dies. And to the left there is my apple tree, which I'm hoping next year might be ready. I'm really hoping. And the bird feeder. I've got to move the bird feeder next year because it's too close to that apple tree and I don't want the birds eating all my apples. I created a monster. A lot of flowers blooming though. So that was a really good old time Tony Caravan rant. And why not? I just get fired up. If I were the type of person who was into the stock market, I'd be buying stock right now because there's nothing wrong with the economy. There's nothing wrong. The U.S. is going to do just fine. And it's up to you. And if more people would live like I do, just get yourself a place. My house, my mortgage, and insurance and taxes cost are like a third of what the average person pays rent for. And I have all of the amenities that anyone could ask for. So you just got to look around. Go to Zillow or one of those places online and find yourself a house. And in the meantime, listen to my music, read my recent books. You know, there's some good stuff in there. I decided I'm going to come out with another book at the end of the year too. And I have another song in my mind that I'm going to be putting together. Go to rockflux.com, my website. There's links there to my music videos. They're mostly just, some of them are a lot, aren't like music videos in the sense of MTV-ish. But you can listen to my songs for free there. I'm also on Spotify. Avoid the songs on my first album, that 8-track album. It was not really, that stuff wasn't really good. I don't know why I put it out. It was like, I don't know. It was me getting into it. But the last couple dozen songs I've put out are great, I think. That's where my new lettuce is coming in there. And that's not zucchini, that's butter squash. So, rockflux.com.
There are the little things, like measuring TVs on the diagonal instead of by their width, or the advertised prices that don't include taxes and fees or extra charges. Then there are the lies of omission, where they conveniently forget to mention a very important detail. There are media lies by the newsreaders and reporters who receive fat paychecks from their corporate sponsors. The political lies by the Washington elite who receive millions from lobbyists who really write the laws. The bankers who create money out of thin air and charge interest and fees for what they get for free. The agent provocateurs who spin and weave tales to create support for their wars for profit. The charitable foundations that keep most of the money they raise and spend very little on the causes they pretend to champion. The con artists and scammers who prey on the innocent, the elderly, and poor, and wage slaves. The people who deceive you and break your heart. Those who are in denial about the real state of affairs and how bad things really are and getting worse by the day. Yeah, they lie, cheat, and steal every day, every way they can. And we choose to ignore them because we have no choice. But I choose to ignore them because I have the choice. For it's still a wonderful world with lots of cool people and creatures and plants. So I just ignore the lies and live my life, paying less and less attention to the liars at large.